Good morning. Our morning panel after the first day of the fest is always difficult. The speakers are heroes, those who come here uh, in the morning. That's not the first year that I am moderating this 10 o'clock panel, but we are planning to have panels which will wake you up. I hope that this panel will also wake you up, our good morning panel. So we are continuing the topic of the assets of top civil servants of Yanukovych's times, and what we are trying to do, what we are doing here is about the work of the journalists, what journalists manage to do with the recovery of assets and with the disclosing assets. What have the journalists found? What have they found of such things that previously no one could find? And also whether the journalist investigation helped these assets to be returned to the state ownership. I'm happy to see my colleagues. Sometimes we have the colleagues that we are happy to see. We have Maxim Savchuk, Schema Program, Katerina Kapluk, Schema Program, and Alexa Shalaisky, наши гроши. Our position is that we shouldn't forget any of the stories, because when we forget such stories, this allows law enforcement people to also forget about that. And our first speaker is Katya Kapluk. The floor is yours. My case is on the assets of Alexander Klimenko, who was the Minister of Revenues and Taxes back in 2012, 2014, and one of his most famous assets is the hunting base, which is close to Pereyaslav-Khmelnytsky. He had the zoo there, he had 2 tigers and 2 bears there, and they were kept there much better than in some of the state zoos. But in the beginning of 2014, they found out that really there was such an asset. And when I worked before Следство Info at Gramatsky, I went there. Klimenko was not in the country then. He went to Russia. Then, as he said in an interview, he said that Russia was closer to him because that was the Orthodox country. Some people probably forgot what he looked like. And let's watch the video about him and his zoo, which became then very infamous. And Klimenko was using that in his political promotion, this thesis about tigers. We see how Klimenko's running away from Donetsk airport together with Pshonka. The border police failed to stop them. They managed to leave the country, and this video became well known. Then Klimenko left, and because he had a lot of money, he started shooting the political promotion for his political force. The interpreters cannot hear the sound. We hope that there are subtitles there. Sorry. Basically, what tigers was that about? That's the hunting base. First, the owner of part of this real estate was company Goldwyn related to Klemenka. In 2014, the hunting base was expanded and there was the zoo. These are the tigers. We saw the veterinary passports of these animals. This is the part which was not finished in 2014. Later the construction continued and there were always the guards, even though Klemenka ran away, but the territory was guarded well. And this case is quite famous because Klemenka himself, he was asked several times because Klemenka had a lot, the companies related to Klemenka had many real estate objects, apartments. Hmm? Basically, the final owner of these hectares is the company, that the final beneficiary is Oksana Marchenko, Medvedchuk's wife. And this area has a long story. In 2014, after Maidan in May, some new assets were registered which did not exist in 2012. You saw there was a hunting base, the house for personnel, gym, and some other facilities. So in the end, after Maidan in May, they managed to register that. There were no arrests then. And in July of 2017, the companies that were related to Klemenka were arrested because that was the case at the military prosecution office. The problem is that the companies of Klemenka appeal against it all in the administrative courts. They are trying not to allow Arma to manage that and to dispose of that, and the situation is still in the courts, and we don't know when the courts will be over. Thank you. That's interesting to recollect how it was. But do you know what happened to the animals? Are they still there? No, they had to give them to the zoo. I believe that the funding was reduced and there are no animals there, but the guards were still there, at least last year. Most of these assets related to Klemenka are managed by Arma. We mentioned Arma yesterday. but many assets related to Klimenko are arrested. And what do Klimenko's lawyers do with them? And they go to the court, and the toll is blocked. First, the cases in the cases in the court of the first instance, then the second instance, and that is the situation. Alexa will talk about many cases. You need to get prepared. Then you. I have a couple of pictures because now Maxim is getting ready. Unfortunately, we do not hear the question because it's not asked into the mic. Whatever is said not into the mic, the interpreters cannot translate. In the register, there was no assessment value of the real estate. They don't sell it. The agency has to take it for management, then they have to assess it. The agency can lease something out, and their task is to get some profit of it. It's difficult to imagine who would buy this base. It would cost a lot because, and it's very difficult to maintain such a facility, such an asset, and I'm not sure that they will be selling it. Maybe they're leasing it out.
Yes, they were appropriated by the authorities, and there was a supervisor who was supervising those tigers, how they were kept, and they were all then transferred to a zoo, because there have been, my understanding is that that some financial problems started at that time. So there were the so-called pedigree passports written even for these tigers, and I might be mistaken, but it seems to me it was they were transferred to a zoo, and as the zoos can buy, can purchase the animals for them. All the paperwork was done properly, and you know, the passports, the pedigree passports, were written out for these tigers. Yes, that's absolutely true what you said. The scheme had started yet before Mr. Klimenko's ascendance to power. There was a Terra Invest company initially, according to our information, and we were even told that Mr. Kuchma, the former president, had visited even in the period of time before Mr. Klimenko's ascendance, had visited that facility, and allegedly the Belozersk National Park was they were kept there, and the animals were kept there, and so since 2000 approximately these that scheme functioned, or had functioned until or before, even before Mr. Klimenko's coming to power. One more question. Well, who initiated the proceedings? You mean which proceedings do you mean? Well, regarding Mr. Klimenko and his assets, are there any court hearings? Are there any prosecutions in the courts of law? Well, the prosecutions, or rather the cases were initiated against a number of companies that were in Mr. Klimenko's property. I think the original name of one of the companies was Unison Apartments. It was a real estate agency, and a number of other companies that allegedly were related to Mr. Klimenko, because he was not seen or officially registered, rather, as a co-founder of any of these entities. So these were according to our information, these were the proxy companies, and so the companies, the group of companies whose assets were arrested, they appealed that arrest and the confiscation of their assets and so on, and therefore the arrests were done by this ARBA agency. We cannot hear the questions. The interpreters cannot hear the questions. Well, nobody objected, if I understood correctly, the question. After the military prosecutor's office initiated this case, and the court, upon this, the appeal of not the appeal, but upon the claim of the prosecutor, military prosecutor's office, they made their judgment to confiscate those assets. The completion of these of the physical forfeiture of the assets has not yet been completed, to the best of our knowledge. The joke was about some equipment malfunctioning, and Mr. Zlochevsky was mentioned with that regard. Maxim Savchuk and the scheme program have allegedly identified one of the real estates belonging to him. Well, yes, in real terms, it seems that Mr. Zlochevsky was not as well known and popular as he is now. I mean, during the times of Mr. Yanukovych's staying at power. Recently, we have heard of Mr. Zlochevsky's alleged meeting with Mr. Well, the minister that we've mentioned earlier. Klimenko, yes, Mr. Klimenko. Mr. Biden's son, the U.S. Vice President's son, was seen meeting them both too, and some other businessmen and some other well-known people. It's the area of the Khatanyevka, I think, village, and there is a dam there that strengthens, that reinforces a little bit the shore, the beach of a river, and allegedly there were some properties found that allegedly belonged to Mr. Boyko, and so Mr. Savchuk started trying to identify the property rights of these real estates, and some information pointed to the alleged ownership of Mr. Azarov of these assets. And there was also a cooperative sort of company partnership. Real estate partnership, so it was organized not as a private property company, but as a condominium, sort of condominium type ownership, and we believe that somehow it belonged to Mr. Zlochevsky. They were doing some gardening there, and it was for the first time when we employed the UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, in order to film these real estates. Afterwards, we have found that besides besides making some enclosures of their own territories, fencing off, that territory from the rest of the territory, they also enclosed another 14 hectares, which would be around 30 acres of a territory that allegedly didn't belong to that Kluchi partnership. So we were told that they didn't have the right to enclose that territory, as that was the public property land, and any citizen of this country could visit that territory and move there freely. So we managed to make them remove the fences around the territories that didn't belong to them, and there have been recently some automobile servicing activity or business there. When Mr. Zlochevsky returned to Ukraine, we have been waiting for him there, but we didn't manage to meet him there. Well, the national park rangers and supervisors told us that the payments were made by the owners of these properties adjacent to Hatanivka village to the Hatanivka local community, and so they were quite happy, because that was quite a lot of money that they frankly had never received before. A question that we cannot hear. Use the microphone, please. I have confused these two partnerships. There was the Veliki Kluchi and Just Kluchi partnerships. Mr. Zlochevsky, according to our information, has already left this co-partnership or condominial ownership partnership, according to our information, and the investigators were asking to clarify what was the source of the money that was invested in there or used for that purchase. they couldn't prove any part of that money belonging to Mr. Zlochevsky, and so it was all dropped. Mr. Zlochevsky then was also associated with Burisma company that when during the time when he was the Minister of Ecology of Ukraine, that was entitled to issue the licenses for the extraction, natural resources extraction activities that Burisma company was going to do here in Ukraine. A little bit more about Mr. Zlochevsky's investigation done by some of our other colleagues. For example, the store, the shop called Zloche. And I'm also going to tell you about how his family continues earning money here in Kiev. The boutique, the shoe-wear boutique, was opened recently in the central part of Kiev, where they trade in the luxury footwear. We managed to learn that Ms. Karina Zlochevskaya, Mr. Zlochevsky's daughter, is the owner of that store, and so it's in her ownership. And Sergei Andrushko's, we filmed how our journalist Mr. Andrushko visited that store and was trying on some exorbitantly priced shoes, like $40,000 a pair or something like that. So again, in this story, we encountered the situation when the structure, the ownership rights structure, was not at all related to Mr. Zlochevsky, and then he met Mr. Kononenko. There was an energy forum attended by the Vice Premier of Ukraine, and so after that International Energy Forum, the investigation started and the attempts to identify what belonged to whom and so on and so forth. But he continues, communicating and maintaining contacts with a number of officials, and we have a colleague of ours, Mr. Alexander Chernovalov, investigated one of the schemes where Burisma company, in which Burisma company is involved, and he managed to find out that it is connected with one of the companies that are related to Mr. Poroshenko in a circle, and so they extract some natural resources, natural gas and things like that. As these companies operated successfully, I think one of the reasons why the investigations against and prosecutions against Mr. Zlochevsky were stopped was because he and the presidency inner circle had some relationships. Now we can see another video describing these findings.
If you have any questions, I will be able to answer them. You're welcome. Are there any questions on Zlochevsky, or do you understood everything? Tell me, please. Well, when talking to the village council, maybe they had a question, an issue on initiating the case to return the revenues which were to be taxes which were to be paid to the village council. Is there any reaction of the state fiscal service? The first question, no, they didn't have such a question. They saw the first part of the video. When I came, they said, okay, we saw these assets, but no one initiated it, and I don't know anything about state fiscal service. Unfortunately, if the question is not asked into the mic, we cannot answer, we cannot translate. This is the territory of Khotyanovka. Any other questions? Then Alexa, are you ready? Alexa from Nasze Grosze will tell us about important discoveries of their media findings. I will be talking about some other things. I will start from such a story. May I walk back and forth? back in 2014, Lesya Ivanova, who worked in Nasze Grosze. The mic is not used properly. She said, I have an idea. Let's look at who owns the buildings which were owned by Yanukovych. And I said, okay. She was looking, okay, that's owned by Privata, this one is owned by BPP. We were making news of that. We found a building in the center of the city which was owned by Yanukovych, and then we found out that it was sort of owned by Korban, and then the lawyer of Korban calls me and he says, no, that's not true, that's not our offshore company. I said, that's your offshore company. He says, no, there is a person, I know exactly who owns that. We talked for 25 minutes. And I said, okay, write your vision. He was writing for 2 weeks, then send something to us. We didn't publish it. I said, go to the court. We have enough facts in a month. Korban has a search at home. The General Prosecutor's Office shows some stamps, and on top of that there was a stamp of about our offshore, and since then I understand that the lawyers lie. Then 2 weeks ago Alina Strizhak comes. She used to work in Nasze Grosze. She used to work in Nasze Grosze в Bigus, now she works with us. And she says, I looked at where are Azarov's buildings in Vienna. He sold them. I have a document from Austria. Everyone says, so what? Basically, people were saying, okay, let's put it into the news, and we were so much disappointed because 3 years ago we were taking every story, it was like a bomb, then we would understand that it's all not there, and then what's the sense to follow it? Why am I telling about Strizhak? I will show this news, the building. Why is that of interest? I will show so that there's something useful. Strizhak was making this piece of news, researching some new registers. We started to download video lessons on how to work with different registers. I will show you where they are. They're not perfect. We don't have enough of them, but we will add up. They are on YouTube. Bigus Bigus Nasze Grosze is all in YouTube, and you will not find us. I will show you how to find us. If you go to Nasze Grosze, to the website, there's a word network. We have a network of journalists who we help. If you click at this network, you will get to the database, basically the Ukrainian registers here, where we have video lessons. And then we do it from YouTube. Here's YouTube. If I switch to YouTube, then I'll get to our page. which is Mezhyhirya, and there are 3 playlists. The first is the registers of Ukraine, 14 registers. Secondly, we made the infographics lessons. They're not as popular as video lessons for us. It's better to do it step by step. Then there are foreign registers. We're just starting it. Austria, business, Bulgaria, Estonia. I believe that is what Trizak was making. And there is also on state, on public procurement, how to find corruption via Prozora. I believe there will be about 100 foreign registers, and if someone lacks, misses a register, come to us and we will help. Talking about the network of journalists, I will tell, because we are helping the journalists you need to if you tell what you need something for, like some journalist says, open this Cyprus company for me, and they are the owners for some trade center. Why do you need this information? Have they stolen anything? No, it's just interesting to see. Basically, sometimes we don't satisfy such a request. I wanted to show you the story about our disappointment. I was saying that we got disappointed. The world cannot understand what type of a country we have. There's this story about helicopter site which is now owned by BPP. And down there is Nasze Grosze Bigus, on top is BBC. BBC discovers that this helicopter site changed the owner. Now some guy is the owner. They say the surrounding people who are in the circle of Yanukovych got some profit because they found a man. A man is related to the company from Kramatorsk, from Donetsk region. Donetsk is Donbass, Donbass is Yanukovych. That means that Yanukovych's people re-registered it to someone. Then they take Bigus and they see that this man is Sergei Moskovsky, who's one of the directors of Yefimov from Petro Poroshenko bloc. And BBC cannot even understand that it works like that. It was owned by Yanukovych, now it's owned by the current authorities, and there are many stories like that. Once we're talking about what happened to the assets of the predecessors, we can sort it out into 4 parts. There's money abroad, money in Ukraine, property abroad and property or assets abroad or assets in Ukraine. Money abroad disappeared because nothing was proven, the accounts were unfrozen. Money in Ukraine, there's one big sum, this $1.5 billion, which were taken by Kramatorsk court. One of the latest interviews of Daniluk was, he was asked something, and he said that I don't allow to spend this $1.5 billion so that we don't have inflation. We need to ask Daniluk. It's like the General Prosecutor's Office is saying that they built roads for this money, and Daniluk says that he didn't give a permit to use this money. In any case, I'm convinced that even if this money is not taken according to the court ruling, it will be difficult to leave it, because Kashkin's evidence is nothing for European court. As to the assets abroad, you take, you sell, they are reselling what people know about, what people don't know about, they do not resell. The most interesting is happening with assets here. There are several types of cooperation with these assets. First, when the assets are arrested and they milk it. When we are talking about Arma, it's not the appropriated assets. These are assets which are used, and the money they get from it, if they don't confirm that Klimenko is a criminal, they will give this money back to him. Another thing, when they take something, some business for cheap, and then they split it or something, and then when they pay bribe. Maybe you missed that was done by insider, one of the heads of Brok Business Bank, Kurchenko, who stole a lot of money. Now he has become a volunteer. He gives different gifts to security service of Ukraine. You probably know when some security service and the army are building, and the army are building, constructing some housing, and then they pay back by apartments. So the story about this man, it's on the website of the Ministry of Interior, and on the website of the security service, he's constructing a building. He gives 79% of apartments constructed, and he builds some 10 apartments for servicemen. He constructs the building for his money, then gives the apartments away, and this could be interpreted as a bribe. How do they take business away? First were the businesses which were corrupt. When people around Yanukovych, close to Yanukovych, created business that could steal from the state budget.
What the new authorities should have done, they should have stopped that scheme. But what is happening in reality is that they just take over the business that is functioning and continue using them to their benefit. For example, there is a factory, and the factory that processes the coal, because the raw coal, so to say, is not cannot be sold at a good profit, and so they have practically monopolized this commerce of enriched coal, and according to our information, Mr. Yanukovych managed to somehow get two of these factories, coal enrichment factories, for his son. And there was a man by the name of Kropachov. According to our information, he's the one who is buying, has been buying that enriched coal. And Ukrainska Pravda news outlet published an interview with him where there was a discussion of how these factories were bought, and Mr. Krapachov said that Mr. Klimenko didn't take part in the purchase and was not related to that purchase. We didn't believe that at all. And for example, there are the situations when the price for a ton of enriched coal was the price was 99 hryvnias, and then after Mr. Krapachov, soon after Mr. Krapachov bought these factories, the prices grew to $140 in a pretty consistent period of time. So we are trying to track what was happening, what happens now, what is happening now, and sometimes it's interesting to watch things over time, over some time. For example, there was a lithium containing deposit of natural mineral resources, and in 2012, and we have a film about that, how that deposit was bought. The land had belonged previously to some farmers. Then a few hectares of that land was bought out from them, and then this extraction of lithium containing resource started. After Maidan, the representatives of the state were not able to prove that that deposit contained, in fact, any lithium. And as you understand, it's quite easy to lose a case in a court of law, and we believe that the real reason was that Kononenko and Abakov's inner circles were somehow related to the ownership rights for those pieces of land. Well, Alexa, really it's interesting to listen to you, and the strong point of your presentation was that you tracked over some time span these developments about these related to these lithium deposits. And now, after your presentation and the presentations of the other our colleagues, it will be interesting to, to somehow deepen these researches on these deposits. Thank you for your presentation. The question was not heard. They are not being prosecuted or, well, literally followed. There is no follow-up. But my question is, when you refer to the lawyers, do you mean the human rights advocates or real lawyers, professional lawyers, and so on? Well, I try to call the lawyers, for example, the counselors or the barristers and solicitors. I try to call them their proper, professional titles, and the judges I call the judges. But lawyers obviously is a more generic term. I will give you one more example. There was one of our informal investigations regarding Mr. Kurchenko, and when I was discussing that with one of my friends. I was approached by one of my friends who said that, oh, we have enough proof to put Mr. Kurchenko in prison. And I asked him who's going to do it practically. And I asked why Mr. Kulik, whether Mr. Kulik, a high-ranking official of the Prosecutor's General Office, was involved in that. And he said, no, Mr. Kulik stopped doing that because he was transferred to some police authority, some police entity in Ukraine. My question is, has it happened so that, for example, not you initiated these informal investigations, but you were approached and by the formal authorities, the officials, and asked to pursue some investigation? And then how efficient are the law enforcement authorities of Ukraine in investigating these wrongdoings that you have so eloquently described? Well, I have contacted Prosecutor General's office. I visited them a few times, trying to prove my case. But, for example, you know, when you talk to them, as I did on one of the specific investigations, well, they started boasting, saying that, you see, we have already compiled 24 volumes of various investigation materials on the case on which I was asking, of which I was asking them, and. Sometimes I also even visited some interrogations or depositions. Once I was contacted and offered to discuss, offered by one of the officials of the Ukrainian law enforcement, to discuss the Zlochevsky investigation. We met for a cup of coffee, and then I was brought to a to the premises, to his premises, you know, the investigation authority. And I was told that there would be an investigation, or rather the interrogation of one of the suspects, and I was mortified by that perspective. Then he started practically questioning, asking me about my name and address and so on and so forth. Well, and I said that, what are you doing? I'm a colleague of yours in this business. And they said, yeah, colleague or not colleague, we need to formalize somehow our contact. So that's what happened. The similar case was with Mr. Yefremov's case. Well, speaking about or evaluating the efficiency of the law enforcement in Ukraine, I'd say that the level of corruption has been reduced. But now I would say that after some stabilization of that reduction, from 2016 on, it has again started growing. And with regard to Mr. Martinenko, for example, I think the National Anti-Corruption Bureau's investigation has been quite successful. The Prosecutor General's office and the police, their activities, in my view, their efficiency is dubious. But as far as the Anti-Corruption Bureau, I think it's rather effective, but certainly a lot remains to be done in their work too, in order to improve their work too. But in real terms, the scope is not to put everybody in prison, all the wrongdoers, but just one as an example that would be, you know, that would produce some desired effects, effect. I would also ask some other colleagues, have there been any situations as according to the previous question, as when you were proactively, so to say, approached by the law enforcers? Well, I was a witness of the investigations on some of the stages of investigations against Mr. Yanukovych and against Mr. Zlochevsky. I was called as a witness a few times, but my deposition was limited to, some transfer of a flash memory stick with some materials that I had accumulated, I had gathered before that, and that's it. As of now, there have been no follow-up. And after, well, having spoken for the last time to one of the investigators, I have doubts that that investigation might result in anything new. And, well, that is to say, summarizing, that you contact them, or you are being contacted by the law enforcers, and so you have some exchanges with them. Well, yes. I'm trying to supply them with some, some evidence and information that I have. Well, Alexa, what about you? Speaking about the construction of what? The construction of one of the new blocks in an area which is sort of a national park, local level national park within Kiev, as this is in one of the isles inside the Dnieper River. And we thought that it might have been illegal. Construction works there might have been illegal. And but our impression was that after they started the investigation, then some of the officials of the Prosecutor General's office they got probably some kickbacks because they stopped investigating, according to our information. And in my case, recently we have found a court decision with regard to one of the construction projects here in Kiev. There was a judgment, but then the implementation of the decision of the court was practically stopped, was terminated, and the reasons are not yet known. And yes, my impressions are very similar to those of my colleagues. I was called in a few times by the colleagues, and I was asked to give some, to make a deposition with regard to some of Mr. Kurchenko's alleged wrongdoings investigation. And my impression after my exchanges with the investigators was that they were, they were lacking sufficient information. There was sort of a puzzle for them that they were trying to fill in with the help of me and the other journalists, and so it was like that. Any more questions? Alexa, I would like to ask you about trade commodity within the context of Mr. Pavlovsky, who is the Deputy Minister of Defense. He was even sort of put under house arrest, then he fell ill. What's your view of the prospects of the prosecution of his case in court? can you tell us about this case? Because we have been interested in the Ministry of Defense wrongdoings. Well, when trade commodity emerged in the press, I was asked by one of the officials who was behind, so to say, of that trade commodities company. And I told him that I didn't have any firm information, and he said, but informally, what's your view? I said that it was, the rumors have it that that there are some people from your defense ministry behind that. And when the Anti-Corruption Bureau started investigating, there were some similarities of that investigation with some other companies' wrongdoings investigations. The fuel trade, as you can understand, is very lucrative, very profitable. And the corruption component is that when the prices sharply fall or sharply rise, it certainly is somehow related to corruption. For example, in the petrol market, the prices are recalculated every hour practically, and and the prices change accordingly. According to my information, some of the expert evaluations, there have been some there were some wrongdoings in that realm, and you know, to cut a long story short, I'd say that no corruption has yet been identified properly by the Anti-Corruption Bureau. Let's hope that it will move further and be more efficient.
In fact, we need to go to courts, to court proceedings. It's not just the criminal court. They submit to parallel to some other courts, and these other courts, they influence this main court, and so we need to go to these court proceedings. Then that paralyzes the judge. One judge requested us once, just come to the court proceedings, just sit there, because the president of the court forces me to do something. But when наши гроши are there, he will react to that. Once we even interfered, we did not allow the Ministry of Defense to do something. They were requesting to postpone the hearings, and then the judge said, okay, we cannot do it every time, but it's difficult. It means a lot of work. That's quite complicated. I think that if the National Anti-Corruption Bureau fails a couple of cases, that would be great. I'd like to ask about procurements. We have a good law. They procure for defense, and I have a case. The Department of Security Service was procuring something for the money from the state, from the municipal budget. They were procuring according to the shortened procedure. I was trying to appeal against, but basically such things could be appealed only via PR campaigns. And we were writing about 2 cars a couple of weeks ago. Emilian wrote, okay, I take it into account. I'm working on the second one. Only PR campaign works. all these abusive words. Toyota cannot be the special car. They put a signal on Toyota and they said that's a special type vehicle. You also wanted to ask, you and then you. So, involve us and will involve others. If there's treason only in your city, it doesn't influence them. But when they start from the top, then it works. I have just a fact. You are lucky people that you are here. When you go to a law enforcement body as a victim, you can leave as a suspect. It's great, you are lucky, and good health to you. That was an optimistic remark. I have a question on so-called special confiscation of Yanukovych's money. Have you managed to find out whose money was that? And can you find out what's the truth? Everything was known. There were approximately 1.5 billion, plus minus. No one knows exact names. They believe 5 beneficiaries are there. These are not Yanukovych's money. Zakharchenko, Klemenko, and someone else owns them. This money was stolen and via offshores were taken back to Ukraine, and some securities were bought for them. Some part of that, whoever owned that, Kurchenko Arbuzov, that was given to Onishchenko. So part of the money out of this 1.5 billion they decided to steal. Good people decided to steal 300 million. They were stealing so that they cut off 300 million from 1.5 billion, gave it to Onishchenko so that he pays the debt. By that money, the debt, Kononenko owned him money, and they decided to pay this debt by Kurchenko, from Kurchenko's money. As of now, because no one was trying to prove that this is stolen money, no one was proving that the offshore companies are owned by Zakharchenko or Arbuzov. A person came and said, I know that this money is stolen. I know that these offshore companies are of Klemenko and Zakharchenko. And they made this act. And in any serious court, it will all fall apart. Now they are trying to lose it all in Ukraine, and they will lose in Ukraine, they will go to European level, and I believe that in 2.5 years they will win. This case about 1.5 billion deserves the discussion of how assets of former leadership go to somebody else's hands. The offshore company that was owned by Kurchenko and Arbuzov, how Onishchenko was trying to buy it, how they're doing. These offshore companies are arrested because beneficiaries are people who are under suspicion. When the owner changes, that's what they wanted to do with this offshore company. When the owner changes, for example, Onishchenko becomes the owner, does the court have any questions to Onishchenko? That is one of the schemes that they were trying to implement. And at some moment of time this didn't happen, they failed to do it. But that's another story that needs to be analyzed, and it's also related to money of the former ones, ex-ones. I like Latinina's phrase. She says, some people write to me and they're surprised. She says, your question is wrongly put. The problem is you need to ask the question why the Zenit Stadium is constructed. People think that it's constructed for football game, and people believe that it's wrong that it's being constructed for so long. But in fact, it's being constructed to steal money, and that's an eternal process. If you look at it from that point of view, then no case